Good morning, students, and welcome to today's lecture. It is going to be our eighth lecture on international law, and today's topic is going to be the international law of the sea. Okay, uh, we are almost coming to the Christmas season, and we will have two more lectures before the holidays. So I decided for us to treat uh, international law of the sea today before the midterm exam next week. Okay? So when we talk about international law of the sea, can anyone remind me how this international law of the sea was created? I talked about it during our first uh, lecture on introduction to law, how America introduced international law of the sea, and it became accepted by the world or by the international authority because when they initially started creating it, nobody challenged them, and it became as a source of international law, repeated practice. That is how we ended up following the rules set by America in the sea, and now we end up having it as international law of the sea. If anyone remember how I explained it in the introduction to law, let the person tell me now. If not, let's go ahead with the lecture, and eventually we will come across the genesis of this law of the sea. Okay? So, when we talk about the law of the sea, there are three major elements we have to consider. We have to consider the resources, and when we talk about resources, we think about mineral resources, oil, gas, fish, and renewable energy. These are what makes up the resources when we talk about the law of the sea. Now, another section of the law of the sea is transport. When we talk about transport, we talk about navigation, cable, and pipelines on the sea. Okay? People living in the coast area like Nigeria and Cameroon, for example, knows or have idea what we are talking about because once upon a time Cameroon took Nigeria to international courts here in the Netherlands, challenging the claims or the disputes we had or Nigeria had with them about the territory. And eventually, Cameroon won the case, but Nigeria still refused to honor the verdict of the International Court in The Hague. But anyway, we will come across this case as we proceed with this lecture. So, another section of the law of the sea is transport, like I say. So, navigation, cable, pipeline. Then, the third section of the law of the sea is environment. When we talk about environment, we talk about dumping, pollution, special protected areas. We know how Europeans used to come to African seas and dump waste products because nobody was able to challenge them. That is how the seas in Africa are polluted to the extent that all the fishes in our sea there ran away and migrated to the European seas. But anyway, we'll talk about that one later. So you now know the three sections of the law of the sea. One, I said resources, which comprises mineral resources, oil, gas, fish, renewable energy. Secondly, we have transports that consist of navigation, cable, pipelines, and the third one is environment, which consists of pollution, dumping, and special protected area. These are the three sections we are going to talk about in this lecture. Okay? Now, we cannot talk about the law of the sea without talking about the conventions, the law of the sea conventions. Remember what I said about the major source of international law? I said that the major sources of, or the major or the most valid source of international law is the treaties, the conventions, the memorandum of understanding, etc. Any sort of agreement signed between one state and another, that is what makes up the international law. So now we are talking about international law of the sea. We have to talk now about the conventions, law of the sea conventions. Law of the sea conventions, I think the first one was drafted, I think 1958. We have in 1958 Convention on the Territorial Sea and the contiguous zones. We have Convention on the High Sea. We have Convention on Fish and Conservation of the Living Resources of the High Sea. And then we have in 1988 or 1982 thereabout, we have the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. That was, I think, the last convention that was ratified by the United Nations when it comes to the Convention on the Law of the Sea. Okay? Now, having talked about the conventions, this is where the laws are derived from, because without these treaties, then this wouldn't, every country would continue to assert jurisdiction over the sea, and that would become problematic. So that is why the International Law of the Sea Convention was ratified by most states in 1958, followed by the one in 1982, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Okay? Now that we know that there is a valid treaty or convention, whenever we talk about the law of the sea, now we have to now talk about jurisdictional zones in the law of the sea. Okay? When we are talking of the laws of the sea, jurisdictional zones in the law of the sea becomes very paramount. Now, jurisdictional zones in the law of the sea consist of the internal waters, the territorial sea, the contiguous zone, the exclusive economic zones, the continental shelf, high seas, and the international sea beds. These are the jurisdictional zones whenever we talk about the law of the sea. These 6 or 7 zones that I mentioned are usually where the states try to assume or to claim jurisdiction over whenever there is conflict. So the state or that state might claim that this is my internal water, or this is my territorial sea, or this is my contiguous zone, or this is an exclusive economic zone, and so forth and so on. So we now know that jurisdictional zones in the law of the sea are the internal water, the territorial sea, the contiguous zone, the exclusive economic zone, the continental shelf, the high sea, and the international seabed. This we are going to deal with separately for you to understand it properly. Okay? Now, I might not go into details measuring the going to the extent of talking how it is measured until when I will start giving this lecture via a PowerPoint presentation. So I will skip the measurement, how it is measured, where is where and where is where. So we just keep on going with the lecture, and we will talk about the how those measurements are reached. Now, when we talk about these zones, jurisdictional zones that I mentioned, then these jurisdictional zones were actually established based on when they were constructing the baselines. They had to construct these baselines in order to set rules that will guide these jurisdictional zones. Okay? Am I making sense? Now, when they were constructing the baselines in this law of the sea, they set the normal rule that has to be followed. And this normal baseline for measuring the breadth of the territorial sea is the lower water line along the coast, as shown by appropriate symbols on charts officially recognized by coastal states. For example, Nigeria is a coastal state, Cameroon is a coastal state. They had to, based on the measurement, agree that this is where the low water line starts, and this is where the coastal line starts. So this is what they called the normal rule for establishing the territorial sea. Okay, so let me repeat it again. The normal baseline for measuring the breadth of the territorial sea is the lower water line along the coast, as shown by the appropriate symbol on charts officially recognized by the coastal states. This was also encroached in Article 5 of the law of United Nations law of the International Law of the Sea, Article 5. The general rules, however, is that coastal states exercises the greatest degree of jurisdictional competence over those zones that lies closest to them. Okay? Now, it might start getting confused, but take your time and find this treaty, United Nations Treaty on Law of the Sea. You will check Article 5, where the normal rule is established. You will also find the general rules that was established, and these general rules, I said, is the coastal states exercise the greatest degree of jurisdictional competence over those zones that lies closest to them. Don't worry about the grammar. By the time I show you on PowerPoint presentation, it will make more sense. The purpose of today's lecture is for you to at least have a basic understanding what the international law of the sea is all about, and so that you'll be able to grasp the terminologies you will eventually start hearing when you are talking about international law of the sea. So we have talked about now the normal rule for measuring the baselines of the territorial sea. There is normal rule, there is general rule, and I have just explained it. And there is a straight baseline rule. This straight baseline rule is drawn not from the low water line, but from a series of artificial lines. Students, don't worry about the grammar. You will get to know it when you see it on the PowerPoint presentation. But the most important thing for you to know is that there are 3 baselines for determining the territorial sea zone. So one is there is a normal rule, which means that the normal baseline for measuring the breadth of the territorial sea is the low water line along the coast, as shown by the appropriate symbols on charts officially recognized by the coastal states. This was encroached in Article 5 of the United Nations Law of the Sea, and the general rule is the coastal line states exercises the greatest degree of jurisdictional competence over those zones that lies closest to the sea. And the third one I said is the straight baselines. These are drawn not from the low water line, but from a series of artificial lines. Okay? Now, how do we establish internal waters? Now, this international United Nations International Law of the Sea also established internal waters as the area that flows automatically from sovereignty exercised over land territory. Okay? Now, while territorial sea is 12 up to 12 sea miles, full sovereignty except for rights of innocent passage. So when the measurements from the baseline, you measure 12 miles towards the sea, that is where the state can claim that it is their territory. Anything outside the 12 miles is international territory, and it is no man's territory, and you have right, or a state have right to pass that place without being intercepted by the coastal states. Okay? Now there is what they call also contiguous zone, and the contiguous zone is up to 24 sea miles. Remember I said territorial sea is up to 12 sea miles. Now, contiguous zone is up to 24 miles, which means if you pass the 12 sea miles and keep proceeding up to 24 miles, then that place is a contiguous zone jurisdiction, which means that territory outside the territorial sea where coastal states may exercise the control necessary to punish or prevent infringement of its custom, fiscal, immigration, or sanitary laws and regulations within its territory or territorial sea. Am I confusing you now? Let me explain it again. What is the question, for example, in the exam might be, what is a contiguous zone under international law of the sea? Your answer will be that it is the sea miles or sea kilometer, depending on what your country is using. In America, they use miles. I think in Nigeria, for example, they use kilometer. So you calculate it. But what is in the convention, they use mile to establish it. So contiguous zone is up to 24 sea miles from the territorial water. We have already talked about what the territorial water is. Now, territory outside the territorial sea, where coastal states may exercise the control necessary to punish or prevent infringement of the custom, fiscal, immigration, or sanitary laws and regulations within its territory or territorial sea. So, for example, if Nigerian Navy are in their territorial water and they sight a ship approaching, maybe a Netherlands ship, Nigeria Navy have right to go and intercept the sea if the sea is up to or is within the 24 sea miles, which means that approaching sea is actually on the contiguous zone, which means the Nigerian Navy has right to go and intercept them and bring them to their territory, to their territorial zone, or to their territorial zone, in order to investigate them, see if they are pirates, if they are smuggling the oil, or blah blah blah. But if they are somewhere above that 24 sea miles and Nigeria try to intercept them there, Nigeria would be violating international law, and so they have to be very careful that that sea is on their contiguous zone before they could claim jurisdiction over that territory, or before they could intercept the invading ship for whatever control, either immigration control or custom control or sanitary control. The ship has to be up to 24 sea miles before Nigeria could claim jurisdiction or have power to go and intercept them and query them and search them and do whatever exercise that warranted the interception. Okay? Now, after the contiguous zone, there is what we call exclusive economic zone or the continental shelf. This exclusive zone or continental shelf could be established by the coastal states about 200 nautical miles. Remember, we talked about 12 sea miles, we talked about 24 sea miles. Now we are talking about 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone. A claim for a continental shelf is not actually necessary. Okay? What is necessary is the contiguous zone. You can claim jurisdiction there, or you can claim territorial zone, but the exclusive zone or continental shelf, any country can have access to that place. It is not necessary to claim jurisdiction there. Okay? The coastal states have the right, however, for the use of the living and non-living natural resources to use the exclusive economic zone. Okay? For example, in Nigeria, another country that is not a coastal country cannot come to any of those, both continental shelf or the exclusive economic zone or contiguous zone to come and claim or to drill oil or to search for fish there or blah blah blah. But that country close to that 200 nautical miles can go to those places to fish, to look for oil or to drill oil or to do search whatever natural resources that is possible to be seen in that area. Okay? Now, and the continental shelf for other economic purpose and the right to construct, authorize, and regulate the construction of artificial island and certain installation and structures. So, when we are talking about the 200 nautical miles, the coastal states have the following rights: the rights to fish there, the rights to drill or explore any natural resources there, or to build or construct anything they want to construct or install in that area. In this exclusive economic zone, all states have freedom of navigation and overflight, as well as freedom to lay submarine cable and pipelines. Did you understand what I explained? Although the coastal states could or have right to fish in the continental shelf, or to drill oil there, or to install whatever there, other international states have right of passage. Okay? Only right of passage. They also have right to lay submarine there, because there it is actually international territory. but the natural resources that is found in that zone belongs to the coastal countries. Okay? Am I making things clear? Now, I talked about the exclusive economic zone slash continental shelf, but this always confuses people. That is why the Article 76 of the United Nations Law of the Sea define continental shelf clearly. The legal definition of continental shelf based on Article 76 of the Law of the Sea states that continental shelf extends to 200 miles, sea miles, like I said, from the baseline or to the outer edge of the continental margin, whichever is further. Is it getting clear? So, continental, when they ask you what is the continental or how can you determine the continental shelf under international law of the sea, you could say that Article 76 of the law, United Nations Law of the Sea, states that continental shelf extends to 200 sea miles from the baseline or to the outer edge of the continental margin, which is further. So this used to be too complicated, and neighboring countries who are both sea country like Nigeria and Cameroon always have this kind of disputes. That is the duty of our navy. If you're living close to the coast, you always see sometimes the navy will be sighting another ship there, will be shooting, firing to them just to give them warning not to pass, or to give them warning that they should stop, that they are coming to investigate them, to check proper thing. But the international UN International Law of the Treaty eventually, this because it was lately in 1986 or 82, like I said, that it was ratified, and since then this kind of conflicts on the sea has reduced drastically, and because each captains or countries already are used, they know where they should go and where they should not. Okay, so that is thanks to this Article 76 of the United Nations Law of the Sea. Okay, now after that there is fishing. Where can a coastal state fish? About fishing problem, they always have problem. You see here news where maybe a ship from Somalia was seen in Indian water, fishing in Indian water, and Indian custom will intercept them. Or we don't see this often in African seas, because African seas has been seriously polluted by the West, and the fish there are no longer much. So we don't usually have this problem, fishery problem in African sea waters, because they are not fertile enough for fish to grow. But anyway, that is story for another day. So when we are talking about fishing, where can a state fish? A state can fish in their internal waters or in their territorial sea, or also in the exclusive right for the coast states. Okay? That was solidified also in Article 61 of the United Nations Law of the Sea, and when they said they established the exclusive economic zone. This Article 61 and Article 62 of the International Law of the Sea created a special management system for managing the exclusive economic zones. Okay? Now that we have talked about where you can go, where you cannot go, then the Article 58 and Article 87 of the International Law of the Sea, also Article 19, clearly defines where countries can safely navigate without violating the coastal states' jurisdictional territory. Now, when navigating under the internal waters, exclusive rights of coastal states to define rights of navigation. So if a foreign state is trying to navigate internal waters of another coastal state, it is only that coastal state that will determine the right place or have right to decide where the foreign ship can navigate. In other words, you must get permission from the coastal state before you navigate their territorial or internal water. Okay? Also, in territorial sea, rights for innocent passage of foreign ships, that is, passage is innocent so long as it is not prejudicial to peace, good order, or security of the coastal states. So what they are saying here is that in the territorial sea, passage of a foreign sea is allowed as long as the coastal state is not or does not feel threatened by such passage. As long as it is an innocent passage, you will be allowed to freely pass. Now it is left for the authorities of that country, mostly the naval authority and the custom authority or the immigration authority, who determines if such passage is peaceful or with good intention. If they are not with good intention, they have right to seize that vessel or that ship and then take necessary legal action against the state bearing that ship. Okay? Now we have talked about the navigation. Now we have to talk about oil, gas, mineral resources. Internal waters or territorial sea, only exclusive right of exploitation belongs to the coastal states. Okay? Exclusive economic zones. Exclusive rights for exploitation, but no right of exploitation if conflicts with recognized sea lanes. Okay? Now, from what we see now, you see that the coastal states have exclusive rights for exploitation in their internal water or in their territorial sea, but in the exclusive economic zone, they still have rights, exclusive rights, but they have to make sure they are not as that another state is not complaining of their violating some certain lines that is already established in that exclusive zone. Okay? So the right to explore gas, oil, mineral in the internal territory or territorial water or economic zone belongs to the coastal states. Okay? Now, cables and pipelines. In the internal water or territorial sea, the coastal states have exclusive jurisdiction to lay cables or pipelines. Okay? In exclusive economic zone, all states enjoy freedom of laying submarine cables and pipelines, but delineation of the cost of the laying of a pipeline is subject of the consent of the coastal state. Did you understand what I explained? Especially in the exclusive economic zone. If a non-coastal state wants to lay pipe or cable in that territory, although it is the territory all states have freedom, they must first get permission from the coastal state. This is established also in Article 79, paragraph 3 of this United Nations Law of the Sea. Okay? And coastal states may lay down conditions for cables and pipelines entering its territorial sea. Am I clear? Now, renewable energy installations. In internal waters and territorial sea, the coastal states have exclusive rights to build installation and artificial islands. Okay? However, just like in pipe and cables in the exclusive economic zone, exclusive right of coastal states to build installation and artificial island for economic use, including renewable resources, was established under Article 60 of the Law of the Treaties. But rights for other states to build installations is necessary for pipelines and no right to build installation and artificial installation if conflicts with recognized sea lanes. The same thing, the non-coastal states have rights to install their renewable something as long as there are no conflicting violation, and they must also get permission from the coastal states before any installation is started. Okay? Now, islands and exclusive economic zones. Rocks which cannot sustain human habitation or economic life of their own shall have no exclusive economic zone or continental shelf. This was established in Article 121, paragraph 3 of the Law of the Sea. Okay? Archipelago, a state constituted wholly by one or more archipelagos and other islands, where an archipelago is itself defined as a group of island or parts of island and their interconnected waters, which are so closely interconnected as to form or to be regarded as forming an intrinsic entity. Did we understand what I explained? I just explained how an island and in the economic, exclusive economic zones can be established, or how archipelago can be established. I said that under islands in exclusive economic zone, rocks which cannot sustain human habitation or economic life of their own shall have no exclusive economic zone or continental shelf. In other words, is nobody's business. That was established under Article 121, paragraph 3 of the Law of the Sea. While archipelago is a state constituted wholly by one or more archipelagos and other islands, where an archipelago is itself defined as a group of islands or parts of islands and their interconnection waters, which are so closely interconnected as to form or to be regarded as forming an intrinsic entity. Now, other conditions were also established for an archipelago. It must link main island of the group. It must follow general configuration of the island, but most importantly, ratio of water to land within the baseline must be not less than 1.1 and not more than 9.1. Example of this archipelago is the Philippines, the Indonesian, the Fuji, Japan, and even the UK. These are countries that were established based on archipelagos. Okay? Right of transit passage in straits used for international navigation applies generally to all straits connecting high seas or exclusive economic zone with other areas of high seas or exclusive economic zone which are used for international navigations. This was established under Article 37 of the United Nations Law of the Sea. Okay? Therefore, ships shall proceed without delay, refrain from any force or threat of force against the coastal state, pass the strait in the normal mode of continuous and expeditious transit. You see, if a ship from non-coastal state is, although they have right to navigate towards the exclusive economic zone of a coastal state, but they must navigate without creating any doubt, without creating any reason for them to be intercepted by the coastal states navy. They have to proceed without delay if there is no suspicious movement, and they have to refrain from any forceful passage or threat of force against the coastal states. Okay? Now that we have cleared this, then we ask, what is then high sea? Now, high sea is defined as waters beyond territorial sea, which is free for use by all nation, all flag state jurisdiction. In other words, when you pass the territorial sea, you pass the exclusive economic zone, anything further than that becomes the high sea, and any ship with flag can navigate there without being intercepted by any by the coastal states. Exception to the flag state jurisdiction is 1. Visit, piracy, hot pursuit, broadcasting, slavery, drug trafficking. So, if the naval authority suspects anything, the exception clause comes in. Okay? Now, base. 2 stage definitions of base. 1, it has to be base has to be defined in two ways. Stage 1, a bay is a distance between the natural entrance point of a bay measured, and a semicircle is drawn along a line of that length. The area of the semicircle is then compared to the area of water found landward. If the area of the semicircle is less than that of the area of water, then it is a bay. Second stage of definition is if the distance between the entrance point is less than 24 miles, it may be drawn between them. Otherwise, the closing line can be drawn with the bay in such a manner as to enclose the maximum area of water that is possible with a line of that length. This is how a bay is defined. Okay? These are what we need to know when it comes to the international law of the sea. We have dealt with almost everything you need to know about this topic, and eventually when I start using the PowerPoint presentation, I will be able to show you how the 200 nautical lines were able to be established, or the 12 sea miles were established, or the 24 sea miles of the exclusive economic zone was established. But for now, this is what you need to know in order to be able to give your lecturer proper big questions when you are having this kind of lecture on international law in your various schools. So that is why all you need to do is just take your time, listen to the tape once, twice, and 3 times so that you can be able to comprehend all the legal jargons or grammars that has to do with this very topic. I wish you guys a nice weekend, and I see you guys in the midterm exam before we go home for the Christmas. Until then, my name is Gabriel. I'm your online lawyer, and my duty is to give you this A or B in your international law course, your law course, or your European law courses. Enjoy the lectures while you enjoy the Christmas holidays, and see you guys after the exams. Bye bye.